Welcome to Misunderstood, where we talk about identity, the meaning of the word race, and explore the multicultural and multiracial experience through personal stories, candid conversations, and expert insights. I'm Hannah Lee. Thank you for being here today, and let's get started. Today, we're diving into the conversation around transracial and transcultural adoption. I am honored to host Patrick Samuel Young Armstrong, a multifaceted individual, a podcaster, speaker, creator, and a new father. Patrick's journey as a Korean American transracial and transcultural adoptee is a profound exploration of identity and acceptance. From a childhood marked by rejection to a transformative awaken at 30, Patrick's story is one of reclaiming and embracing his heritage and humanity. He is passionate about fostering community within the adoptee and Asian American realms. Patrick is joining us today to share his insights and experiences. So get ready for an inspiring conversation as we delve into themes of identity, belonging, and self-acceptance.
That was one of the first times that I felt like, okay, if I'm going to survive in this world and find acceptance, even at first grade, even though I couldn't articulate this then, I'm going to have to hold this in. And holding that in meant, okay, I need to reject this outer version of myself. And I couldn't understand why I wasn't white. When I was in middle school, I came home one day and was just praying to God. I'm like, why did you make me this way? What's wrong? What's wrong with me? I was in the status quo for 30 years. I upheld the dominant narratives of adoption because I wasn't thinking critically about my own identity and who I am.
Before we start, it's important to say that Misunderstood is a space where stories, ideas, and research are shared for your consideration, but it's for you to shape your opinions in light of your own knowledge and experience. My hope is to explore, learn, and grow together with you. I don't claim to have all the answers. My aim is to start conversations around these topics. Welcome, Patrick Samuel Young Armstrong.
Hey, Hannah Lee. I'm so excited to be here, and hell of an intro. I appreciate that intro. I'm used to giving the intros and not receiving them, so that was awesome.
Oh.
That was amazing.
I'm so pumped to have you here today. I know a little bit about you, and I'm excited to learn a lot more, and I'm excited to introduce you to our listeners. So let's just jump right in. So you grew up near Indianapolis. What's your earliest childhood memory?
Oh, wow. Great question. Earliest childhood memory.
That you would you'd be willing to share.
Yeah, no, I hadn't even thought about answering that question. I don't know the last time that I've been asked that question. So I would say the one that I think about quite often is my first day of kindergarten. I went to a Catholic grade school, I guess, and the first grade that they offered classes for was kindergarten. And I went in, didn't know anybody, and I walked up to two kids who were playing with toys, and before class started, and I asked them if I could play with them, and they said no.
Oh.
And I don't know if that was my first ever experience with microaggression. I would like to say that it was just they were already friends, and I was not part of that friend group, but if I had to say earliest memory that I can actually recall, that is one of the ones that always comes up.
Yeah. Wow. So kindergarten, that's 3-4 years old, I would say.
I think so. I'm not very good with ages and grade ranges.
Yeah, neither am I. Because I didn't grow up in the States, I'm always confused about pre-K, all these pre-stuff. It's just the things before first grade that confuse me here.
The preschool stuff, I have no idea. They have all different levels of it. So I'm just you know what? I'll keep those memories locked away. I don't need them.
Wow. So you were 3-4 years old with that memory in kindergarten. And at that point, how long had you been in the States?
So I was born in 1990 in March, and I was adopted same year, I think in June is when I arrived in the States. So came straight from Korea to Indiana. Well, I guess by way of Detroit, I believe.
So you were 3 months old.
Very young, yes. 3 months.
Wow. And can you share a little bit what happened? Do you know the reason behind your adoption?
According to the paperwork that I have, my birth mother found herself in a relationship with somebody who worked at the same factory as she did and got pregnant. And then that person, my birth father apparently, went and got married to somebody else, never had anything to do with her ever again. And because of the stigma towards single or unwed single mothers in Korea, she, according to the paperwork again, placed me for adoption, I think, immediately after birth. And so
Wow.
that is the backstory that I currently have.
Have you ever looked into trying to find them?
So I'm actually in the middle of that process right now. It's long story short. When I went to Korea for the second time this past July of 2023, I took some of my paperwork, went to the adoption agency that I was adopted through in Korea, and come to find out they had information on my birth mother, told me that I could start the process to reach out to her, decided that I wasn't going to start that process yet. About a month later, I received an email from the person that was helping me at the adoption agency who started this process on my behalf without my consent. and then about, was it a week later or was it 3 weeks later? A very short time later, I received another email from this person saying that they had sent the letter to my birth mother, and then she had called them in response and was like, hey, she has a family and all this stuff, and she had never forgotten about me, was wary of reconnecting because of her other family who does not know about me. But the person who was executing all of this stuff, again, without my consent, told her that it would behoove her and me to reconnect with each other, even if it was just via letter. And I received that response, it was a lot. And I decided I would write a letter, and I have written one. I also wrote probably 40 more letters and haven't sent a single one yet. So right now we are in the middle of trying to get this first letter translated that I want to send, and then that story will continue.
Okay, my jaw has been on the floor for the past 2 minutes. Oh my goodness. Okay, we got to talk about this a little bit.
Let's talk about it.
First of all, this is huge. How did it feel when you arrived in Korea for the second time? How old were you, by the way?
So I was 33 on my second
Okay.
trip, 32 the first time I went, which was the October prior.
Okay. So that was recently. That was
Yes.
just a few years ago. So you go there, and I mean, I don't know. I could only imagine that if I was in your shoes, I would have a hard time walking that day to the adoption agency. How did it feel as you were on your way there and then finding out that, oh my gosh, she's like accessible. Like you could actually reach her. She's within reach.
Sure. So I took my paperwork, I made the decision on my own the day before I flew out. And this was the first time I think that I'd ever really made that decision consciously for myself. I think other people had always said, oh, you should find your birth parents, or like, why don't you search for them? And I'd just never really been kind of in my purview, not something that I felt I was ever interested in. And then for whatever reason, I was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this. And it took me about a week. I was there for 2 weeks in July. It took me about a week to really work up the courage, I guess, to go. And I only went because one of my friends who lives over there said he would go with me. And so shout out to Rick Allen for being my partial translator and for being my emotional support as we went over there and did that.
So you flew to Korea alone?
Yeah, so when I went in
That's brave.
October of 22, my wife went with me, and that was a great experience for us. And then I knew that I needed to go back. I felt like that first trip didn't really do what I wanted it to do, and so I wanted to go back at least one more time in the immediate future. And so, yeah, went by myself, knew a lot of people over there. I was over there for the International Korean Adoptee Association's triennial conference. Every 3 years they have one. And this was the first one since the lockdowns in COVID and the pandemic. And I was just over there, and we took the train one day because it took a minute for me to get an appointment. I was just going to walk in there. And people were like, don't do that. They're like, schedule an appointment. They will not help you. And so I scheduled an appointment. I will say the people that I worked with and talked with were very helpful. They were very kind. But being in there, like, the emotions didn't really hit until they told me, oh, we do have information on your birth mother, because I was able to review my file, and everything that they had in their file was the same as what my parents had kept. So as far as I know, like that, it felt like, okay, I just have all the same information. The only thing that was different is they had information on the foster family that I stayed with prior to leaving Korea. And so I was like, okay, thanks. Can I take copies of this? So I took pictures of all the forms, waited for them to get copies. And when they came back, I asked, I'm like, do you have any information on my birth parents by chance? And they were like, oh, yeah, we do. And I was like, okay. And then they're like, we don't have very much.
We totally have it. Yeah. It's
exactly.
right here.
In this little book, right in front of me. And I was like, okay. And they're like, we don't have much information on your birth father, but we have a lot of information on your birth mother. And I was like, okay. And it's like my heart started racing a little bit more. And I was like, well, can I have it? And they're like, no. And so because of like privacy laws and whatnot, you have to go through the NCRC, the National Children's Rights Center or something like that, I think. And it's like a letter writing campaign. So over 45 days, they'll send 3 letters. And if they don't respond, you have to wait a year before you can start that process again. And you have to fill out a form to start that process. So I was like, okay, give me the information. And, if I want to do this, I'll do it. And so we left, and I honestly felt numb inside, like afterwards. Like that was the immediate reaction. It was just like I was mad that they wouldn't give me the information. I feel like, what am I going to do? I don't have like a Korean phone or a phone number or anything. Like I'm not going to go run up on that person. I understand to a certain extent why they won't give that information out, but it was just very frustrating. But for the most part, I just felt kind of nothing for a little bit.
Yeah, because it's like, yes, I understand the technical and bureaucratic aspect of it and the larger picture. But also a different perspective is, oh my gosh, I'm 32 years old and I've waited my entire life in a way to know whom my parents are. And you have it right there on a piece of paper and you won't give it to me. And I've flown all the way from the States. And it's that simple, and you won't give it to me.
Like, I couldn't even know their name, and so I don't even know her name still.
Wow.
Like, even after this process has played out without my consent, they didn't even tell me what her name was. And I think that's because they want to play the middleman. They want to have control over this conversation that might take place. And so, so I'm still, again, just like I'm at the way station waiting to make that final connection.
Okay, you walk out of there, you're feeling numb, you're feeling shocked probably, you're overwhelmed, but you ultimately decide, I'm going to let this go.
Yeah, so I was already in the process of like, I'm going to write my memoir. I'm like, this is the time for me to write this memoir. And I was like, so after I got that information, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to wait till I finish this, and then I will, I feel like that's a good cliffhanger end of the book, and then I will write the second book after I go through this next part of my journey. And so that was the reasoning I was telling myself as to why I was going to wait. And I felt like I had gotten a modicum of closure, even though the door is obviously wide open. Like for me, it just felt okay to leave it here because she doesn't know that I even looked anyways,
That is such an interesting kind of protective mechanism that I feel you have. Like, you know what? This is a little bit too much for me. Let's just end season 1 here and let me process this and we'll come back for season 2. This is a great cliffhanger for season 1.
Well, it was like, that's a way, I think protective mechanism is a great way to describe it. It's also like control. Like I had control over when I wanted to go forward. And that's why I was so upset once they went forward without me, and without being like, oh, we would like to do this for you. Is that okay? They didn't even ask me that. They just did it. That's because it felt like they wrested control from this part of my
Yeah.
story from me.
Yes, 100%. So, do you know if it was a specific person or it was just like someone was being sleepy on their job and they just like, oh, what's this piece of paper? Oh, I guess I'll just file it. And then next thing you know, the process has started.
So it was the same social worker who did the file review and stuff with me in Korea. They were the ones that did this. And it was, as far as I can tell, it was because they felt like I'm going to do this person a favor. Like, technically, I don't think that they're supposed to just skip that whole step and just start the process without my consent anyways, which I didn't want them to do. But I felt like they were like, they really want to know this person, so I'm going to go ahead and just send this letter off and see if we can't
So
start
could
something.
it have been a cultural misunderstanding because they were like, here is this guy that grew up in the States. He doesn't speak Korean. He seemed very eager to get the information about his mother. I couldn't give it to him. I feel bad that he just walked away now. Let me just do him a favor and get it started.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what it boils down to, for sure. I mean, I think one of the reasons that I haven't sent this letter off in the first place is I want to get it translated myself, so that way my words are being construed the way that I want them to be. And also because I do still harbor, I don't have any like animosity or anything towards my birth mother. Like, none of that. Like, I don't feel any of that towards her. But this whole like agency middleman situation, I still harbor I'm still angry that they did that, you know? And so, like, I would assume that the story that's in my paperwork is the story. Like, I don't have any reason to doubt that. Nothing that they shared that she said when she called them has given me any reason to think otherwise. And that might not be the reason. And so right now I can only operate from the place of knowledge that I'm at, which is this story and also everything that's now happened in the last 6 months or 8 months or whatever. And at the end of the day, to give like even further context, I never felt like I wanted to know my first family at all. Like, I didn't have any. I grew up in a positive adoption experience. I had a lot of love, and I still have a lot of love for my adoptive family. And like, overall, it was really great. And I never thought that I needed this other connection. Like, I never thought about them at all, to be honest. And after all of this has now happened, like, one of the things that as I was writing, that I realized was like, okay, I was thinking about this person a lot. I just suppressed that for a long time. But because I was doing a lot of that suppression and telling myself that I didn't want to know, like, I can't even imagine now, like, what their face might look like, or their voice might look like, or even just their aura. I don't have a sense of them. They're not even a ghost. It's just a void there. And even when I was in Korea, when I was walking around the streets, I never once thought, oh, that could be my birth mom, or, oh, that could be a part of my family. Like, I never thought that, and I never felt that. But now I'm like, since getting these other letters, like, or getting that first confirmation, like, I'm starting to address that void a little bit, thinking about it, but I just don't have any. I still can't grasp what that person is like. So I have nothing there, and it would take, making this connection to be able to start to fill that void in a little bit.
Wow, this is just wild. Yeah, I 100%, understand that disappointment and that anger that, yeah, they violated your process, your story. It was like the few things that you kind of did have control, like you said, like, you don't even
Right.
have a face, you just have this void. And then you have this one little piece of control and that was taken away from you.
Right.
So I totally get that. On the other hand, this story sounds kind of miraculous and divine in a way, like this divine intervention, or like, the universe, God was like, no, ain't how the story's supposed to end. They're actually, there's more to it. And who knows, we'll never know exactly what happened and what caused them to push the process forward, but it did happen. And here
Right.
you are. And then you still had the choice to shut it down at that point, no? I mean,
Sure.
you still can, but instead you
Right.
sit down, and I don't know how the heck you did this, but you sit down, you grab a pen or your laptop, and you start writing. And what
Yes. Yeah, so I got that email at like 7 in the morning, and it like messed my whole day up. And like I was really struggling most of the day. And after my wife got home from work, she went upstairs, got ready for bed. It's about 7:30 at night now, so about 12 hours later. I just sat down and knocked out that first letter. Or no, actually, that is a lie. That is a lie. I wrote the first letter while I was driving to go eat breakfast somewhere to try and clear my mind of all this in my car.
You were like voice dictating the letter?
No. I was typing it. I don't voice
you
dictate.
were typing and driving?
I was driving dangerously. And so I wrote this letter, and honestly, like, I went back and read it a bunch of times, like, and I've edited some of the other stuff that I've written after that, but that letter came out exactly the way I wanted it to. But then later that night, I was like still feeling a lot of feelings, still trying to like process all of this, and I sat down after my wife went to bed at like 7:30 p.m. and wrote 6 more letters, I think. And then over the course of now, it's been, I don't know, since last August, I've written, I would say, probably 40 some letters. And it's all different. It's like talking about my life, all addressed to her, all addressed to my birth mother, talking about the anger, talking about like the grief, talking about my family, talking about what it's like to live in Indiana, talking about coffee, like just all these different things, just trying to like get it all out. And like through this writing process, that's where I found out that, oh, this is like something I've been thinking about a lot. Like I have a lot of questions, you know, and I never thought for a long time I'd ever want to ask them or had anything to ask. And it's like, oh, I do have a lot that I would love to talk about at some point, with the understanding that we may never have a conversation. I could send my first letter off. She could never respond. That's her prerogative, and I would have no ill will towards her. This first letter that I wrote, is everything I think that I want and need to say. And at the end of the day, like, I'm like angry at the other people right now, and maybe some of that could shift, and that might be true. But throughout this process, I really don't feel anger towards my birth mother at all. My birth father, a little bit different. Like, that's a whole different thing. But my birth mother, like, knowing what I know now about adoption and how those practices are executed and how, you know, women are treated and were treated even at that point in the 90s, like, for whatever the reason is, I don't have any anger. I don't ascribe any blame. Like, even if the story that I know is different in any way, like, that's just how it's happened. And I'm not happy about it. Like, I don't like that that's what happened, but that is what happened. Like you said, you know, that is what happened. And so I live the life that I live now. I am the person that I am now, if not in spite of, because of everything that's happened since being relinquished, for whatever the reason is. And even if I could change something, I can't. And so I've gotten to a point where I don't live in the hypothetical, the what if. I understand I could have had a different life. Doesn't mean it could have been better or worse. Who knows? Who's to say? But it would just been different. And I live the life that I live now. And I'm okay with that.
I feel that you have to be so strong to survive what you're going through right now, because it could drive people insane. This not knowing, these thoughts around, well, what happens if she decides that she gets the letter and she doesn't write back? How does one cope with that? Which I think in a way, you, again, another protective mechanism has stepped up for you. You're like, well, I'm still going to get out what I need to get out, hence the 40
right.
letters.
Yeah.
Just in case this relationship doesn't come to be, I still want to say what I have to say. And I think it's different saying it before versus after.
Sure.
The answer comes. What do you do to keep yourself grounded? You seem like a very healthy...
A lot of therapy. 100% therapy. That's been the biggest thing. Like, if I wasn't in therapy, I don't know if I would have reacted the same way. And I don't know if I would be here at this point feeling the way that I feel now. Like, that has helped ground me. When all of this happened, I called my therapist, or I messaged my therapist. I'm like, hey, some wild stuff just happened in my life. I need an emergency session, and I needed to do it in person. And like, I had a lot of tears in that session, and she was super kind enough to make time for me, and like I could get some of that process out with her, and just some of the stuff that we had been working on already helps to prepare me for this, even though that wasn't what we were preparing for. Just like understanding myself a little bit better, finding my way from self-acceptance to self-love, and like being able to really love myself. Like if I wasn't in that position, I don't know. Like I have a pretty good support system around me. I have an incredible partner. I have really good friends. I have really good friends in the adoptee community who can understand to a certain extent this type of situation more than just a random person could. But at the same time, I, for a while, was not in this position of like truly being this more whole version of me. And if I wasn't this version of me when all of this went down, would I still feel this way? Would I not be angry at that person? Would I not have fired off multiple letters, and then been angry if I didn't get a response like from her? Like I think about that a lot. And another thing that helps ground me, speaking of the community, is the idea that I know a lot of people who would, not metaphorically, literally probably kill someone to get this information, to just know. Because it's something that we deserve the knowledge of at the end of the day, and something that I would say 10% of us probably ever actually get. And even if we get that information, it's even a smaller percentage that gets the actual truth of the story of what happened, why we live this different life that we live. And so something that's grounded me has been like understanding the privilege that I have now received to have this information and to be able to make this choice of like, oh, I'm going to wait and I'm going to reclaim and wrest control back after it's been taken away again. And knowing that I've been on the receiving end of so many stories of people who have navigated this situation in different ways and have been told and shared with that it is okay to approach it however you want to approach it. And so what grounds me is the community, and knowing that my story, again, is part of this larger fabric of people who have gone through something similar. And without them, like I would be lost in this. I don't know what would happen. But because I've been lucky enough to hear from so many different people who have experienced a reunion or someone who hasn't experienced that but searched for 20 years, and has found nothing. All of those different pieces help make my story more whole, and then helps me fill in gaps in the story that we are telling that's part of this larger adoptee narrative.
I feel so emotional speaking with you. I did also, when we had a quick chat before this recording today, I cried then, and I've been my eyes have been glistening this whole time. I'm just blown away by you, and I think you are just a phenomenal human being, and I am rooting for you.
Thank you.
Wow. So, and then all of this is happening in the midst of you now being a father. I mean, I'm sure that's colored the whole thing, like just added a whole other layer on top of it of you are the father now. You know what it feels like to care for this tiny little creature that's dependent on you. And that's just taking it to a whole other level emotionally.
Yeah. Well, for a lot of adoptees, you have your first child and it's like the first biological relation, the first time you can actually see yourself. It's not like you just see for me, like another Korean person. I'm like, oh, that's me. It's like, oh, I'm actually seeing my DNA reflected back at me. And hilariously, I think he looks more like my son looks more like my wife most of the time than me. But I do see those little reflections.
Wow.
And he'd be like laughing a lot right now. And I feel like I laugh a lot. So I'm like, okay, yes, we are intricately tied together. What's really interesting for me, though, is that I feel like because I've done so much of this internal work that's obviously ongoing, it's perpetual, like it never ends. I have been, again, prepared for something like this to the point where I haven't really felt overly emotional in that respect. Like from the adoptee perspective, from like the identity perspective of like, oh, this is making me think about different things. I feel like I've been so just into being a parent, a dad, that it's just like, that's all I'm really worried about. And like right when he was born, there were some things that I was feeling a little bit. And I guess the biggest thing, and I don't know if I've talked about this at all anywhere else, but I think the biggest thing that I've realized, and I want to say that this is my own perspective, my own thought process on this, not speaking for any other adoptees or all adoptees or anything like that, speaking specifically for me, is that having and holding my first biological relation, my DNA relative, I, one, could not imagine giving this person away, relinquishing this kid for adoption for whatever reason. Could not imagine it. I also can empathize and have compassion for and understand how systemically someone could be put in such a place of where they had to do that for no other reason than their own survival. Not because they wanted to do it, and not because they thought it was like the best decision even, but because like for whatever reason, like this choice had to be made. And it sucks that people have to make that choice. And that, I think, connects me to my birth mother on another level. Like that's another one of those layers. Is just I can understand a little bit more, even though I can't even imagine giving my child away. I can understand why, especially in the context of history and culture, specifically to Korea, why that might happen. And as a man, that probably wouldn't happen to me, you know, or it would be less likely to happen to me if I were single and something would have happened to the mother of my child in Korea had I lived that life there. So it's just like, I feel like I felt even closer, like spiritually almost, after that. And then it was just like, I had that thought, I processed that in my body, and then I was just like, I'm on to parenthood, you know? And it's just like, I, for the most part, feel like I don't have time for anything else other than how am I best taking care of you today?
Wow. So I'm feeling this again, and I felt this when we spoke the first time, is you have an incredible ability of adapting to change. And you're willing to kind of be in the moment with what's in front of you and just focus on that. I think that's a real gift and ability that you have, you know, to handle all of these changes. And you have gone through an incredible transformation from childhood to adulthood. And I relate to it a lot. It has to do with, you know, being Asian in America and being raised by white parents. I'd love for you to share some of that with our listeners and all these massive life changes you've been through, and talking about some of your coping mechanisms, what grounds you and the tools that you have, and just being so impressed by your ability to handle these massive changes. And I think that's also connected to this journey of transformation you went through, where you acquired tools along the way. So,
yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for saying that. I will say that therapy has helped me develop a lot of these tools and got me grounded, but definitely would not have entered into therapy had I not gone through the transformations that I've gone through. So I think you kind of talked about it at the beginning in the intro, but I categorize my life in phases a little bit now that I'm where I'm at now. And the first phase is rejection, which is the rejection of my identity as an Asian American person. And that spans the first 30 years of my life. So not just childhood, but adolescence, young adulthood, early adulthood. Like that's how I navigated the world. And that's not to say that I had a terrible childhood. Again, I had a positive adoption experience for all intents and purposes. I also, having grown up in rural Indiana, in a predominantly white community and an all-white family. Well, okay, not all white. My younger sister also adopted from Korea, not biologically related to me. But all of those things considered, like, we didn't talk about race. We lived in a colorblind household, and when you experience something like that, it was always put back on me. Experience like racism or microaggression, it was always put back on me as, oh, well, you are too sensitive, or you're taking that the wrong way, or it was just a joke. Like, lighten up, essentially.
Just before we continue,
Yeah.
was it just you and your younger adopted sister, or were there more siblings?
Just us. Yep.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know the fertility journey of my parents. I don't think we've really ever talked about it. I think that had something to do with it, but I don't want to say without certainty, so I won't. But that was it. It was just my parents and then myself and my sister.
Got it. And when you were saying you would experience these microaggressions or subtle racism, or maybe not so subtle racism, and often your parents' response to it would be, oh, you're probably overreacting, you're not seeing it, with the right perspective, probably you're being too defensive. Or can you give us an example?
Yeah, so it was the subtle stuff that they would respond to that too. The overt stuff, they would always ride for us and be like, "No, we're not gonna, that's not
Mhm.
right. That's not okay." But subtle stuff like all I can think of is just like any joke felt like that could have even had a tinge of racism. That was treated with the idea that, oh, well, that's just a joke. Like, like you don't have a very good sense of humor, essentially, like that. You take things too seriously. I was always very emotional. So not emotionally intelligent, but very emotional. Um, and so, like, I would have outbursts like that because of stuff like that. And that would be treated that way. My first,
Which,
like,
by the way, I want to interrupt here and say, you
yeah.
don't know that you weren't emotionally intelligent. That could have been your emotional intelligence.
I appreciate that. I categorize it as being as pre-emotional intelligence for myself, but I will take that as a compliment and pass that on to younger Patrick as being like, maybe you were a little bit more emotionally intelligent than you give yourself credit for.
I'm just being protective right now because I was very emotional growing up, and I was looking back now on my young self. I'm like, no, that was emotional intelligence because I allowed myself to feel in
Sure.
those moments. And maybe it wasn't, convenient for some people around me
Sure.
that I was feeling so much. But that's the beginning of emotional intelligence, is feeling.
Well, I had not thought about it that way, but I agree because I was definitely like that. I would react from feeling a lot, and that's what it was. Um,
And then reacting is a whole other thing, which I understand. Like, I've
sure.
learned over the years, like, just because I feel something doesn't mean I have
Right.
to react or act upon it. And that's, I think, what comes with adulthood and maturity.
Yes, 100% agree. One of the things that I can think of that I'm not sure, because I don't really remember the response to it, but like the first like overt racist thing that I felt like I experienced. Well, actually, there wasn't a response because I didn't tell anybody. Was in first grade, the first day. I walk into the building, the gymnasium where we all go sit with our respective grades. And I'm like looking around, and some kid runs up to me and pulls his eyes back at me and says, "How do you see out of those things?" And then ran away. And
Ugh.
I just didn't even know how to respond or react to that. And I don't believe that I told anybody about that. And because I can't really pull out any specific memories from before that, but like I was already living in a situation where racism and just like color blindness was like permeating throughout, like the family, the community, all of that. And like I'm aware of all of that happening. And I think for me at that moment, one of the reasons I didn't say anything was because I knew that it would probably be treated as like, oh, well, that was obviously a joke. Maybe it wasn't right of them to joke like that, but like you shouldn't take it so serious, or don't let them see that it bothers you, essentially. And that was one of the first times that I felt like, okay, if I'm going to survive in this world and like find acceptance, even at first grade, even though I couldn't articulate this then, I'm going to have to like hold this in. And holding that in meant, okay, I need to reject this outer version of myself. And like I couldn't understand why I wasn't white. Like when I was in middle school, I came home one day and was just praying to God. I'm like, why did you make me this way? Like what's wrong? What's wrong with me? And that would really become foundational to the way that I navigated the world in middle school and high school. And then because I so deeply rejected this part of myself, I would continue to do so in college, in my young adult life. Like I didn't know any other way than to operate that way.
I can relate to a lot of this, and I actually hopefully if I make it to season 3, I definitely want to do an episode about internalized racism. But I just have this vivid memories of every time I would find myself standing in front of a mirror, basically, I would be like, oh yeah, I look Asian. I was so sort of internally detached from how I looked externally in a way. Like I did not identify myself internally as Asian growing up, that it would really throw me off when I looked at myself in the
Yeah.
mirror. And I'd be like, wow, I look really Asian in that mirror. So much more Asian than how I feel.
It was almost like a dissociation. Like I had those moments too, and it felt like almost like I wasn't
Yeah.
in my body. Like I was looking at myself, looking at this person in the mirror, and that
Mm,
wasn't me. I was over here to the side looking at that person who couldn't be me.
yeah.
Like how can I look like that when everybody else looks a different way? When everyone else looks actually very similar to each other. No shade to white folks, but like very similar. Like everybody else had brown, curly, blonde, curly hair and was like had the very light complexion. Like they all looked the same over here. And then the version of me that wanted to be that was over here looking over my shoulder, looking at me, looking in the mirror, saying, that can't be right. And so like that's that part of rejection is just you try and cleave away this part of yourself because it can't be right. Like there's no possible way that this is the reality that you live. When in reality it is.
I'm curious, when you were in this long phase of rejection, do you feel that it sort of manifested more rejection in your life?
100%. Yeah, because that rejection of my identity didn't allow me to fully realize or pursue the things that I wanted to. It would be performative at best. And so the easiest thing for me to identify as that further rejection was college. So I dropped out of college and I kept changing majors. I kept trying to find what I was looking for, what I was supposed to be doing, like everybody else in my life, all my friends were doing. And I just couldn't find it. And I ended up, the last major I had was creative writing, and I was in classes. I was really enjoying it. At a certain point, I just felt like I was wasting everyone's time and my own time. And like I felt like I knew better. And so I rejected the idea that I was even supposed to continue doing this. And I'm like, I'll just go work. I'll just go do that. And then because I was like, I just didn't know who I was or wasn't secure in just me and Patrick, I went and worked and then worked in probably 30 different jobs in multiple industries over the next 10 years and never stayed anywhere for longer than a year.
Okay, I'm gonna give you 60 seconds and you just drop as many jobs as you can think of. You ready?
All
Set,
right.
go.
60 seconds, a long time. Paint salesman, advertising sales. I worked customer service at an advertising agency. I was customer service at a vet's office. I was a bartender. I was a busboy. I was a barback. I was what else did I do? I did back of house at a Japanese sushi restaurant for like 3 months.
Oh my God.
I worked at a newspaper and wrote articles in sports for a newspaper. I worked at a head shop and sold glassware out of there. What else did I do?
Oh my gosh. Okay,
Okay, yeah. There's more in there. Oh, I worked at a pizza place for a little bit, like making pizzas. There was a whole lot of stuff. It was a lot of stuff. I was
Wow.
a delivery boy. I was a delivery driver. Delivery driver at a Mexican restaurant that went out of business in like 3 months. And it was just like when things got hard and when it felt like things weren't going my way, it was so easy for me to leave. And I
Wow.
think that
Yeah.
was one attributed to the privilege that I felt like I had to be able to do so, and two, just that inability to be secure in myself. I like to think that now that I've done a lot of this work, think about how different my life would have been if I would have known like and had a little bit more security in who I was in college. Because I think I probably wouldn't have dropped out because it was probably getting too hard for me, and that was one of the reasons I left. And I chalk that up more to like attachment. Like I either get hyper attached to something and get very involved when stuff is going good, but it feels like I can't keep that attachment as when things get hard or things don't go my way. I'm glad to say that I'm not in that position anymore, or I feel like I've come a long way with it. But that was a struggle for a long time.
Do you think that this theme of rejection is connected not only to your quote unquote race or racial experience, but also to what was beneath the surface with the rejection of the adoption that you maybe didn't address? And obviously, you had a great life growing up, you had great family, but that it was somehow in the shadows and it was also connected to what was happening in your life?
Oh, 100%. Like, that's the foundational rejection that all adoptees live with. And it's like that gets imprinted in the core of your being, and you carry that with you. That's like your original trauma.
Mhm.
And you can't heal from it, or you can't start to address it until you know that's what's happening. And the way that adoption rhetoric was taught and the way that the narrative is so one-sided in being like everything's good, assimilation, positivity, everybody's happy, it's all love, like that makes it impossible for people to start to address it as early as your first few months of life, because it's already affecting you. This rejection, especially like the separation from your birth mother, which is biologically, like science has shown, is very important for the nurturing and development of children. And we, for a long time, didn't have the language because there was nobody doing work in adoption studies. And there was nobody running studies and surveys and whatnot of people who were adopted to talk about these experiences. And if there were, that stuff was getting suppressed because it ran counter to the narrative of like, oh, well, you can just adopt a kid and it'll be fine. They'll assimilate into your family and everybody will be happy. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. And so, yes, 100%, I feel like that rejection, the rejection that I always felt came and I think stemmed even from that initial one.
Yeah. And then it was also, this whole other layer of also growing up in a predominantly white environment.
Right.
And then it was like, you didn't have it. They didn't give you, they didn't give it to you easy, but
Right.
also knew this kid's, he's going to make it.
It's just going to take him a while, but he's going to get there sometime.
So what was the turning point? I mean, I remember I was in this sort of toxic relationship, and it was just this toxic pattern, kept getting together, breaking up, and it was destroying me. And obviously it wasn't like we were talking about with the rejection of adoption. It wasn't just about the relationship. There were issues underneath all of that I needed to face. But I remember asking my therapist once, like, when is it ever going to end? When is this vicious cycle going to end? I don't know how to break free of this vicious cycle. And he said to me, it'll end when you've had enough. And I was like, yeah, he was great. He was very honest with me. And that hit me really hard. And it was true. One day I hit rock bottom and I was like, I think I've had enough. Yeah. And I've never looked back.
That's powerful.
Thank you. I'm curious about you. What was your turning point?
Sure. So in May of 2020, pandemic has started. My wife and I have moved back from Chicago to Indianapolis, and lots of stuff happening in the world. There is the pandemic. People are locked down, staying inside their homes. There is very highly publicized violence against black bodies, specifically George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. Those three cases, I feel like, were permeating the social consciousness. You're seeing Black Lives Matter really pick up from where it had been with Mike Brown 4 years prior. And then there was starting to see the highly publicized violence against Asian bodies because of the rhetoric coming out of the pandemic. So all of these societal things are happening. And then my wife and I have moved back to Indianapolis, and we were engaged at the time. We had started talking about what it would look like to have kids and what our family could look like and to grow.
Your wife is white, right?
Yes, correct. Yep.
Thing, not just to say like, I need to know the race of other people's partners. It's not about that, but just to kind of add in that layer of you're also in like an interracial relationship, and that just adds another thing here.
Interracial relationship with a mixed Asian baby. Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Sorry, continue.
No, you're good. You're good. You're good. So having those conversations pre-baby, and then having like being aware of like stuff that's happening in society. And in June, early June, I think June 5th of 2020, we are sitting down on the couch to watch a movie. We're flipping through Netflix, and we come across a movie, Always Be My Maybe, on Netflix, starring Randall Park and Ali Wong. It's a rom-com. It's hilarious. But for whatever reason, we're like, okay, let's watch this movie. And
Keanu Reeves.
Keanu Reeves. Spoiler alert. We had been watching Fresh Off the Boat, the TV series with Randall Park, and I think that's one of the reasons that we decided to watch that movie. But we turn it on, and at the beginning of the movie, it starts with a flashback. And Ali Wong's character and Randall Park's character, their families live next door to each other in like these brownstones in the bay. And Ali Wong's character goes over to Randall Park's family, and they're cooking dinner, and Randall Park's mom is showing her how to like cook dinner and stuff. And for whatever reason, that scene like flipped this switch in my brain. And the scene kind of ends, and we're transitioning. And I remember I look over to my wife, we're sitting on the couch, and I go, how am I going to teach our kids to navigate the world as Asian when I don't know how to do that? I don't know what it was about that scene, but that was the moment that triggered in my brain, in the backdrop and with the context of all of these other things that are happening, particularly the violence against Asian American folks that we were seeing, that flipped a switch. And the next day, this was still in my mind. Like I was still like noodling on this question, this idea of like what it means to be Asian. And I looked up Asian Americans on my podcast player. A podcast called Dear Asian Americans came up. I listened to the first episode of that show, was instantly like, okay, these are the things that I need to be listening to. Like, this is where I need to be learning. The guest of that show, he's a professor at USC, said, if you're listening and you enjoyed what you listened to, feel free to reach out. And I think he dropped his email in that episode. And so I sent him an email. And I was just like, hi, my name's Patrick Armstrong. I'm a Korean adoptee. And I'm trying to figure out what it means to be Asian. Like, I don't know what that is. I grew up adopted by white people, like in the Midwest, blah, yada, yada. And luckily he responded. I think in the same day, might have been the next day, but he was like, thanks for your email. Happy to have a conversation. He goes, I'm not a Korean adoptee, but I know people who are. And I've attached a study by one of my colleagues who is an adoptee, and I think that you might find helpful. And it was called Too Korean to Be White, Too White to Be Korean. And it was about 12 Korean adoptees who grew up in the Midwest. And I sat down, I just started reading this paper, and like 30 minutes later, I was like weeping. And I was like, why am I crying at this scholastic article? And it was because I was just reading what felt like my life in this piece of paper.
It was like, I actually exist.
Yes, that's what it felt like. Like my mind and my soul like opened up, like reading this paper, this article. And from there, it was just, I need to learn about adoption. I need to learn about being Asian. I need to learn about being Korean. And I was lucky enough to get connected with a whole host of different people who were gracious with their time and their resources to put me on this path that I'm on today.
So it sounds like, in a way, you sort of instinctually were like, kind of, if we're going to bring it back into like a movie, the idea of a movie, it's like the superhero is like, how will I raise my own Asian son in the world? Okay, I must fast forward, raise myself as an Asian, go. And then
pretty much
that's what you did. You just started raising yourself. You started consuming all of this information and teaching yourself, okay, Patrick, I'm going to hold your hand. We're going to do this. We're going to do the express version.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you grew into this Asian or someone who is embracing his Asianness.
Sure. Yeah.
And, you could have stopped there, but you didn't. You took it to the next level and you decided, I want to become a resource to other people I want to uplift others. I want to be a leader in a way, right? So tell me a little bit about that journey.
Sure.
How did public speaking start and all that?
So the speaking really came out of the podcasting, and the podcasting came about very randomly. Fell into it. I ended up getting connected with the host of Dear Asian Americans, who invited me to come on that show. And he knew that I had been listening to all the episodes. So right before I was getting ready to come on, he was like, "Hey, you're about to listen to 2 other Korean adoptee episodes that I did." And he goes, "Once you listen to those, get back to me, because I think it would be really great if you 3 started a show together about this experience." I was like, okay, I would be interested in having a conversation. So late July, we all get in a Zoom room together. And we're all 4 different time zones. And we talk about what it would look like to do a show about Korean adoptees together. I left that meeting like, there's no way this is going to happen. I was like,
Really?
I felt like we didn't have any chemistry. Like, it was just very awkward. And I was just like, no, not, I'm like, I'll meet again, but I don't know if this is going to go anywhere. And so we kept meeting, and it just kept getting a little bit more familiar and friendly. And in September, we launched the first episode of the John Chi Show. John Chi in Korean means to feast, and we, at the end of every episode of our show, we try a Korean snack, or an Asian snack, I guess. John Chi can also mean banquet, and we take it as like a celebration. Essentially, that's what the show is about: to celebrate our shared heritages and identities and culture and community, and to also uplift the voices of other folks within our community. And so we started with 3 episodes, each one about us, and then we launched right into guest interviews. And from then till now, I think we've done 160 episodes of the show. We basically released weekly for the past 3.5 years. And doing that showed me, and listening to other people, not even myself, but listening to other people, really showed me the power of storytelling and how important it was for people to be able to voice their experience for the first time. And I was getting that in the same way. Like, I was learning from everyone that came on the show, and it was allowed me to like start articulating better my own experience. I think in the first like 3 months, you can hear me in every episode go, "Oh my gosh, like that's something that I experienced," and like and start to internalize some of the stuff that people were sharing. And
I feel that I that's me. I'm like 3 years behind you.
I've been sprinting in this direction since June of 2020. So it's been like, you will be caught up in no time, especially doing this show. But fast forward to May of 2022. We've been doing the podcasting for a while, and that's all I was really focused on. I was working another one of my 30 jobs at this time. And Jerry was going on like a little speaking tour, and one of the stops was in Indiana. And he invited me on this, so I was going with him. And then at the college in Indiana that he was speaking at, he said, "Hey, you should, if you're interested, you should speak too." I told him that you were going to, so you should just do it. And so I got up and shared my experience. That was the first time I'd ever really done that in like a public setting. And I used to get like these nerves whenever I did anything in public that would really hurt my stomach. And I had those afterwards, and I was telling him about them, and he was like, "All right, well, if you're ever going to speak publicly, like, you got to drop those. Like, you got to get rid of those." And something about that piece of advice just stuck with me. And I was like, you know what? I think I could maybe do this. And later on that month, we were hosting a night market event in New York, and he had me MC the event. And through all of this time, I had been since June of 2020 till then, I was reclaiming my identity. I was understanding, learning, doing all of that. And that night in May, I was sharing a little bit about my experience as I was introducing the event. And I just felt like this weight lift out of my body. And that's when I realized, okay, I accept this person, this version of Patrick, who I am, for the first time. And like that acceptance helped propel me towards speaking more, and knowing that through the podcasting and storytelling specifically, like this is what I think I'm supposed to be doing. And not only was it sharing my own story, but having that resonate with other people, and then allowing me to use my platform to elevate them. And so that's kind of how it all got going.
Wow. And this is all just in the span of a few years.
Yeah. I know. Imagine if I would have figured this out in college. I'd be sitting pretty right now.
No, but I think it's even more incredible that you were that willing to run with something, to run into the unknown like you did. You have to be so bold, but you did it. You could have not. You could have
Yeah.
you could have lived another 60 years in rejection.
100%. 100%.
And you still can if you want.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So yeah. You're absolutely right.
I'm having so much fun talking to you.
Same.
I feel so invigorated and inspired, and it's like a visceral experience having this conversation. Like I'm
Thank you.
feeling all these changes you went through when you talk about that weight just lifting off, and this moment of acceptance is so beautiful. It's like this spiritual moment.
It did feel very spiritual. I'm not
Yeah.
like a religious person, but like that felt like religion to me.
Yeah, this feeling of love, making room for love to come in, for softness, for an embrace, like embracing yourself for the first time.
Yeah. 100. That's 100% what it felt like.
So when you give these talks, you kind of take your audience through this process that you went through. And so we start with, I guess, the wound, maybe, and then you move into that leads you to the rejection. And then the next thing is reclamation.
Yeah. So for a while, I'd say probably a year, that's how I would talk about my experience.
Okay.
Late last year, a study came out done by some friends of mine who are adoptees. It's called the Adoptee Consciousness Model. And so it's a framework for understanding the journey that you go through as an adoptee. And there's 5 stages to this model. The first stage is status quo. The second stage is rupture. The third stage is dissonance. The fourth stage is expansiveness. And then the fifth stage is forgiveness and activism. And I had been searching for kind of an adoptee created framework that helped me understand my story outside of what I already was speaking about it about. And when this came out, I'm like, I resonated with it a lot because I felt like this helps me even narrow it down even a little bit more and gives me kind of like this scientific backdrop to be able to talk about it in. I can talk about it in the way that I do and from rejection to reclamation to acceptance to self-love. Like, I think that works as well. It's high level, but the adoptee consciousness model allows me to kind of get a little more scientific and break it down in that way. The big thing is, and you talk about, I could still be in rejection if I hadn't done any of this. I could still go back into rejection now. And through the model, like, it's built in a circle because at the end of the day, you might not always be in forgiveness and activism. You might not always be in dissonance. You might have another rupture moment. You can always bounce back and forth between these stages. And so now when I give talks, I talk about my experience specifically. I talk about it within these 5 stages. So that way I can really show people, I was in the status quo for 30 years. Like, I upheld the dominant narratives of adoption because I wasn't thinking critically about my own identity and who I am. I could talk about my moments of rupture. I had multiple ones, but specifically that always be my maybe moment. Like, that was my key moment of rupture. Dissonance, just understanding my story, learning more about it, and feeling almost uncomfortable with challenging these things, specifically because I had a positive adoption experience. You don't know how your family is going to feel as when you start to have these conversations. Expansiveness, just learning, talking, speaking, feeling brave enough to go out and share some of this stuff that I've been learning. And then forgiveness and activism, the stage that I feel like I've been in now for at least a year and a half, 2 years, has been just really trying to utilize my platform to push back, and not even just my platform, but my privileges, to push back against narratives that harm other people that are parts of the communities that I'm a part of. And so that's how I talk about my story now, is through those 5 stages and the framework. And I still use those terms of rejection and reclamation and acceptance because I think digestible for folks to understand, oh, like I know what it's like to reject parts of myself. I know what it's like to reclaim that and go through a process like that. I know what it's like to accept who I am. The consciousness model it's pretty hyper specific to adoptees, but it allows me to provide a little science backdrop to it. And then the way that I normally talk about it is like how I can connect with audiences outside of these communities. Because like everybody knows what it's like to feel rejected or to feel like they want to reclaim a piece of themselves, or especially want to be accepted in some space or in some community, in some group. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I go about it. And that's how I've been doing it.
I love that. You mentioned families, and especially with positive adoption experiences. So I'm going to kind of start to bring it home a little bit, even though I don't want this conversation to end. But I know you have a baby you need to get back to soon. I kind of want to bring this conversation to kind of wrap it up with love. And when I bring back love, I would love to talk about two families, the love of, you said you were temporarily fostered for a few months. So maybe I don't know if you know anything about that. I just kind of wanted to bring that up again. You were saying, that moment of detachment from the mother and those first few months are so critical. And I'm curious about who were these people that took you in and cared for you when you were an infant. And then talk about the love of your adoptive family. And yes, we mentioned earlier kind of some of the struggles that you had with them, but I'd love to talk about what was that positive experience, and as well as how have they handled this major shift in who you are, and also the shifts in you seeking out, potential contact with your biological mother. So it's a very big, long question, but you take it wherever you want.
All good. So foster family wise, I don't know really anything about them. I have that information that I got from my file. They had like a 1-pager on them, but it was all in Korean, so I haven't had that translated yet. So I don't really know a lot of information about them. You're right, though. I would be interested in knowing that, and I know a lot of adoptees who reconnect with foster families before they ever have reconnection or reunion with biological family.
Because I just wanted to jump in there. I have friends that fostered a baby, and I just thought these people are angels, because it's very easy to get attached to a baby.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine just doing that kind of a service and saying, I will care for this baby, and I'm also accepting that I won't get to keep it.
Yeah. Fostering, I think, it's interesting. There's so many systemic things that I could talk about, and this question is about love, so I won't bog down in the systemic issues of adoption and foster care. But yeah, I would, especially as a Korean adoptee, just thinking about the Korean system and the foster parents that operate there, like, I do think a lot of that is out of love. And a lot of the foster families that I know about from other people who have met them, like, they remember the kids that they took care of if they get the chance to reconnect, which I think is pretty beautiful.
Which, by the way, if you do want to say something about the systemic issues with fostering, like, this is the episode we're talking about all these things. So if you want to throw something in there, we could come back to the love.
Well, I was just going to say that, especially in foster care, like, a lot of people can game that system because you get stipends and you get paid to do that work.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I know a lot like that how much of that has happened. I worked with foster youth in Chicago, and another one of the many jobs that I had, and like that was very prevalent, which really harmed the outcomes, especially if like you were then intertwining with the system of adoption, which is very monetary based, which is very financially based. Like, it revolve around money. It wouldn't revolve around the child. So I just wanted not to push back on your friends, who I'm sure are incredible people. There are people out there who will utilize the system in harmful ways that harm the child. That's not child-centered. And the system does nothing to protect the children in those instances. And usually, if they are bringing up that this is happening, they'll not be believed, which feeds into this larger narrative of when, like, adoptees or former foster youth become adults, go out and live their own lives, and then talk about things that happened to them in their adoptive or foster families that runs counter to this idea of love. If they are not believed, or they are marginalized. They're told that they're ungrateful. They're told that they are maladjusted. You know, they are put in this box as being like the other. They're essentially they're othered because they have a counter narrative. And the reality is that happens a lot more frequently than we allow ourselves to believe. And so that's a very broad overview of some of the systemic issues with that.
I'm glad you said that. It makes so much sense. And that was kind of naive of me, like, oh, yeah.
Oh, no, it's all good.
Yes, that can happen. It can happen. And I had that example of my friends, which are really good people. And I know that that came from love. But it's true that I have heard of awful stories as well. And I think it is important to bring that up.
Yeah. Well, and like things don't happen like in a vacuum. And like, I feel like it's always important to name the multiplicity of experiences that exist, because so often we get caught up in the binary of it was either really great or it was really terrible. And then we pigeonhole people into those two things and we don't allow for the gray space to exist. And again, like there are great foster parents out there. There are good adoptive parents out there. I know it. I've seen it. I know them. And what I'm sharing is, and by no means to take away from them, it's just to add again to the discourse and the narrative around what it means to operate and navigate the system as whatever part that you occupy. So for my adoptive family, they were always open about being adopted, obviously, because we look nothing alike. But it was always love and support. Like even in our rough patches of just adolescence, out taking race and ethnicity and stuff out of it, just like being a teenager and just being a child with parents, like it was like we went through our rough patches for sure. But they always loved and supported me and I won't speak for my sister, but as far as I could tell, my sister as well. And we always had a strong relationship. We always did family stuff. And even when we were going through our rough patches, like they never tried to force us to be anything that we didn't want to be. Even if we feeling those pressures that they were unaware of, that they might have been putting on us or society in general was putting on us, like they never acted like, oh, you have to be this. I would say the biggest one was college, because they were just like, that was a thing that everybody seemed like they needed to do was college, and was like, you need to go to college. But even when I decided I was like, I'm going to drop out, my mom was like, okay. Like she wasn't mad about it. She wasn't mad at me about it. She never treated me differently because of that. And so I really appreciate her for that. My mom especially, I will always shout out, because she was the first person that recognized in me that I was dealing with mental health issues before we ever used the words mental health. And she always encouraged me to go talk to somebody, and I never would. I would always say that I was fine, or that she was reading it wrong when she was clearly reading it correctly. And so I always shout her out for that, because like that was way back, like when I was in high school, she was recognizing this. Yeah, so interesting to me to think about that. With that being said, my parents are conservatives who grew up in rural Indiana and lived there their entire lives. And when Donald Trump became president, they were hardcore Trumpers. And at that moment in time, for about 4 years, I thought we weren't going to have a relationship. It was very hard for us to find common ground on anything. My mom's mom was probably the closest thing we could find to common ground. And my grandma was always my rock. Shout her out. But those were hard years. And what really led us towards a path of healing was when I started this journey and started the podcast. My mom, always a supporter of anything that I did, was like, I'm going to listen to this. And she's listened to every episode. And I knew that she was listening to every episode. And so as we were doing this in March of 2021, the Atlanta spa shootings happened. And it was a moment for a lot of Asian American people. And for me, I was very upset and hurt. And I realized in that moment, I was like, nobody in my family, none of my friends who I grew up with have checked in on me or asked me about like how I might be feeling about all of this violence happening to Asian people currently. And I was really upset about that. And I recorded an episode. It's episode 33. Where it's basically just me going on one long rant about the way that I was feeling about all of this stuff. particularly with my family and my friend group, knowing in the back of my mind that my mom would hear this. And so I record this episode. The episode goes out. About 5 days later, I get a text from her, and she said that I was at work, and she said, I want to say two things to you. She goes, I apologize for raising you in a colorblind household, you and your sister. And she goes, I also apologize, or I also want to say that I know now that I'll never know what it's like to not be white. And those two,
Wow.
huge moment. I started weeping emotional, started weeping at my cubicle that I was working at and was like, I gotta leave. Like, it was a huge moment. And ever since then, we have been growing together and growing individually. And there was one time that I knew where I saw that she was doing this work on her own, where we were walking to go get lunch somewhere, and she interrupts the conversation that we were having, and she's like, hey, on the podcast, you were getting ready to say something about me, and then you stopped. And I was like, I didn't know what she was talking about. She goes, well, I don't want you to do that. She goes, I know it might be hard for me to hear, but I need to hear it. And I was like, oh my God. That was a huge moment, because I was like, okay, this is really, you're really actually doing this. And it's not always perfect. It's not always easy. Not to say yes, this is the blueprint. I have a privilege of doing a podcast every week where I'm talking about all this stuff, and she just happens to listen to it every week. That's a huge privilege. Not everybody has that. And it allows me to kind of get around sometimes some of these face-to-face conversations by doing it indirectly through a third party situation. And it's been really powerful, and I appreciate her for that. I appreciate all that she's done in the last 3.5 years for herself, in addition to the support that she's shown me as I've gone through this journey as well.
Wow, that is so precious.
Yeah.
Life has changed. We're all changing all the time. I'm always really moved when people are willing to evolve and grow together.
Yeah.
Because sometimes someone has a growth spurt and the other person is stuck.
Yeah.
And then it flips. And it's really beautiful when we're able to kind of move together.
100%.
Change together. That's so precious that she listens to all of your episodes as well. That really isn't a given at all.
No, definitely not. And I know she does, because she'll always text me and be like, hey, I really like that episode, or hey, that was funny what was said right there. So I'm like, thanks, Mom.
It's like your weekly date.
Kind of.
In a way.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, Patrick.
Oh, Holly. Here we are.
Yeah, this was such a pleasure. I feel like I've said this already, but I just feel emotional from this whole talk. Very moved by you and your life and your willingness to explore and just go for it. And I'm excited that I met you specifically at this point in your life. And I just know there's just so much more waiting for you. And I can't wait to see what that is. Seems like you've already been touching so many lives and you're just getting started. Before we say goodbye, I wanted to mention, so we talked about the one podcast, the Korean Adoptee podcast, but you have another podcast that you started just because you had extra time in the middle of this whole major life change.
Right.
And you're starting another podcast. So please tell us about these other two podcasts.
Absolutely. So the first show is the John Chi Show. Go check that out, johnchisshow.com, at John Chi Show on all the social media platforms. My other podcast that I started on a whim because I wanted full creative control over something, and which has now evolved into being really my main focus, is called Conversation Piece. It is about the missing pieces of the conversations we're already having. 2024 is the year of Indianapolis. On that show, I'm doing all things Indianapolis selfishly because I want to create a community for my son that I never had, that is diverse, that highlights all the different things and pieces of this incredible city, and double selfishly because I want to be connected to all of these incredible people that have things going on in this city as well. You can check that one out at Conversation Pod Piece. And then lastly, I've been working on a show with Mixed Asian Media, which is how we got connected. Shout out to Alex Chester Iwata, amazing person. We have been developing a show. It is called Check Other with Angela and Patrick. I co-host this show with Angela Wong Carbone, And it is about the overlaps and differences between the Asian adoptee and the mixed Asian communities. This first season is all about names. We have had some really incredible conversations with adoptees and mixed Asian folks. It's been really incredible to, again, selfishly get to understand more of the mixed Asian experience, particularly because my son is mixed Asian. And I'm like, I don't know enough about that. I need to know. And so I can be a better ally, be a better supporter, be a better parent to my son. So that is Check Other. I don't think we have any social media handles yet, so I won't plug those. But yeah, very excited about that show, and excited that and privileged to be able to appear here with you, Hanali. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, ma'am, for connecting us. Well,
Yes.
Yeah, shout out to
Shout out,
ma'am,
ma'am.
Mixed Asian Media. So any plugins, where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Personal Instagram is the best place to find me, and I guess I'm on TikTok at Patrick in the World. Best place to find all show-related stuff, conversationpeacepod.com, johnshishow.com for all of the John Shi Show-related stuff. Check Other, just follow those places, because I'll probably be plugging that there, and I'm sure and hopefully we will have stuff to plug at that time.
Yes. Well, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and family. Also, I'd love to hear from you. If you have questions for Patrick, or if something we spoke about just like lit something up inside of you and you want to share something, leave me a voicemail. You can leave me a voicemail at 323-524-8662. Or you can send me an email, a voice memo to mixunderstoodpod@gmail.com. I would truly love to hear from you. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please like it. Please subscribe to the podcast, and also leave a review.
Leave a review.
Please, I would appreciate that. And you know that you can support the podcast by becoming a patron, starting at $3.99 a month. That's like $1 an episode. You can support more if you want, but you can start there. That would be a huge help. It would help with the production of this podcast. I will put all the details, the links to the patron, as well as the links to all of Patrick's podcasts and sites and things that we've mentioned. We can also put in that explanation, that breakdown that you gave about the process of the 5-stage process or whatever.
Yeah.
We can link the resources of what we spoke about as well. I'll put that in the show notes to any of you that want to learn and read more. And that's it. Patrick, thank you for being here and just being so open, vulnerable, available, willing. It was truly a pleasure to connect with you.
The pleasure was all mine, Hanali. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everything that you do for our community.
Thanks. On that note, we're going to say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. This episode was produced by me, music by Matthias Kunzli.